Hi there. It's Tom and Tom, the podcasting gurus, talking to you
Yeah.
about all things intentional when it comes to business culture. And Tom really here, the other Tom, not me. The other Tom over there is actually no, I'm going to flip the video later. Gee, I just gave away my secret. Anyway,
Mm.
um, the the thing about Tom is he wrote a whole book on ritualizing behavior at work. It's about ceremony, which is ceremonies, as you probably know, are just a way of ritualizing meetings, for lack of a better term. And the funny thing about it is that most organizations, whether they really have all the right elements for a good ceremony, they do tend to ritualize a lot of behaviors. You know, maybe they have an all staff meeting or a monthly financial review or whatever it is. And it's always kind of a similar format and the same output. So it's kind of like a ritual. There's like one area of office life, of work life, that for some reason always gets neglected when it's time to ritualize behaviors. And by and large, it's the one you spend most time doing, or at least hopefully. The larger
And
the organization, the less true this is. But in small organizations, the vast majority of your time is going to be spent working, doing work, creating output that delivers value to stakeholders. That's the stuff that doesn't get ritualized in most organizations. Now, Tom, you were in one where they did ritualize work.
yeah, so I founded one, Menlo Innovations in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where we ceremonialized for the software developers anyway, very close to all 40 hours a week. That means pretty much every hour they were in the office, they were involved in ceremonial forms. And you see this in other locations. Somebody, somebody the example I always like to use, if you show up to Honda and they're like, we want you to do this weld on this bumper to the car. They don't let you just make up how you're going to do it. They will have ceremonialized and ritualized the whole. And they actually, to me, ceremony is always done with more than one person, and ritual might be done by yourself. Just the term I use to when I say ceremonial form, I mean that like you use the term meeting, and I'm like, yes, when two programmers sit down at one computer to write software together, that is technically a meeting. And in my word, that's a ceremony. We've structured how they're going to interact and engage in order to do that work effectively. So
Yeah.
when I'm saying at Menlo Innovations that the team is in ceremonial form close to 40 hours a week, it's like everything they're doing is a structured ritual. We know the inputs, we know the outputs, we know the expectation, and you're doing it with more than one person. And that's unusual for software because most people put people alone in a cube and have them code by themselves. And we discovered it was faster, better, and less expensive to turn that into a social ceremony. I suspect that is true of most work.
Yes. But and and you know you make an interesting point because I've been involved in manufacturing for many years. It's been an area of some expertise. And so I'm very familiar with lean principles. And lean actually has a lot to say about ritualizing work, a lot to say about it. So there are areas of business writ large where ceremonializing work is a real regular thing that people do. But ironically, even in organizations that have adopted agile practices for software development, which is born out of lean. The guys that started agile were all automotive guys, not all of them, but a lot of them were automotive guys, and they were borrowing heavily from lean, and they never quite got to ritualizing the actual work. Like all the practices around it, planning the work, tracking the work, getting feedback on the work, all of that they ritualized.
I will object to that, and only in one dimension. I believe, in what inspired Menlo, which was the work of Kent Beck at Chrysler, where a bunch of my staff were on the original extreme programming project.
Mm-hmm.
So about half of the staff on that project worked for me. Uh, they were the ones who ceremonialized programming, but they never gave it that name. They talked about other ceremonies they did, but they didn't apply it. They talked about a daily stand up and some of
Uh-huh.
the other things. It was when Kyle and I were writing the book on ceremony and discussing it, and we met for breakfast, once a week at the Magnolia Pancake House in San Antonio. If you've never been, must go.
All right.
And we
Noted.
talked about this subject for about a year before it really clicked in my head that the way Menlo and the way Kent at C3 originally did programming was a ceremonial form and a very
Interesting.
powerful ceremony. They just didn't apply the name to it.
Right. And of course, Kent was one of the progenitors of the Agile Manifesto and an original signatory. And so it was more like that idea was there. They just never codified it into the manifesto.
Yeah. The program, like one of the principles should have been program as a ceremony.
Right.
He let him get away with it because he was with a bunch of people who weren't doing paired programming and his aggressive. At Chrysler and Extreme Programming, there were about 15 or 16 components of how they programmed that was a part of their ceremonial form. We took that into Menlo, added more for requirements, which we also added ceremonial form for. But you can do it for any and all work.
Yeah.
It's a really powerful way to orchestrate and to do work. And I submit even the person on an assembly line at Honda who is maybe by themselves, welding a bumper on, you'll discover they exist inside of a ceremonial form. By that, I mean, they can step back a foot and raise a flag, a literal flag, and they'll go immediately from working alone to a manager coming and looking at and working the problem together. So they're existing in their bigger ceremony of how they're assembling. There are other people there. They're not always working together like we did at pair programming, but you can send up a signal and immediately someone is there. And you discover to the extent that work is very ceremonial.
Well, you raise an interesting point because I think we often assume that for something to be ceremonialized, there has to be more than one person involved. But that's clearly not the case. I mean, if you think about some common ceremonies like meditation or prayer, these are things that you do by yourself, but they're very ritualized behaviors, and they have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they have the kind of structure that you look for in a ceremony. So even work that's done individually can be ceremonialized. I mean,
Yeah.
we have the
And
five
I
P's, right, Tom? The five P's have to be there. If they're there, you got a ceremony.
I like pushing on the fact that a second person truly makes it a ceremony, but it's not actually required.
Right.
The the ceremony, the other one I like to use as an example, which is a checklist for a pilot taking off. If you're a pilot in a small Cessna, my dad was a pilot, and so like he would do the checklist by himself,
Right.
right? It's more powerful when you have a pilot and a co-pilot and they do it together. One of the things that's more powerful about it is the second person makes sure you always do the checklist.
Well, that's the power of pairing and the power of collaboration always.
Yeah. So it's to me, it's like ritualizing work and the idea that you could ritualize and ceremonialize almost all of your work. And by that, I mean, if you understand a way to do your work and you know it is almost always successful, and you can compare notes with others and you can try it, you can do it together, you can do it differently in different groups. And as you hone in on something that always works, put it into a ceremony and share it. My point of view, I'm like, that's really the job of management, is to make sure that the ceremonies that lead to success are there. And if they're not there, that the team is working to evolve them so that you have a disciplined, structured, ritual way to be successful.
Right.
And that formula may change and may evolve.
Right.
We understand that, but it's your responsibility as a leader to make sure those forms are there or are being developed.
Right. Your ceremonies should always be under review.
Yeah.
Like the whole point of having a ceremonialized behavior pattern is that it's always a baseline for where you are in the moment that you can build on. If you don't ceremonialize things and you just do whatever that comes to mind in the moment when you have some work in front of you, it's really hard to improve that because there's no
Yeah. It may
system there.
work. And you may even be successful, but you haven't built a system that will
Right.
scale. And in our book, Wildly Successful, we're trying to teach founders how to build systems that will scale successfully, that they can continue to be successful as they grow. And more importantly, as they grow, they can build a company they actually want to work in.
It's a perfect spot to end it on, Tom. You want to scale, you want to make a place people want to work at, ritualize everything, including the work,
Yeah, it's especially the work.
especially the work. Do you ritualize your work? If so, we'd love to hear in what way you do that. If you don't do it, I'd be interested to see what you have to say about why it doesn't work. So
Yeah,
drop
and why we're crazy.
right. So drop us a comment while you're down there. Click that subscribe button. And as always, we would love to hear from you. If you want to chat with us, we're available. Our URL is beintentional.biz. You can reach out to us there. And until the next time, we'll see you soon.
Bye.